Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, today, random questions and answers with your college expert. Today, we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Today, Prudent Money Contributor and college admissions expert John Hupalo is here to get us up to date to what is happening with all things college. John, always great to have you on the program.
Hey, Bob. Good afternoon. Great to be with you.
You know, I thought we would go over just some random questions and answers that come up and talk a little bit about getting some good information out. Let's start with, how are the college enrollment trends looking to you today?
Yeah, boy, Bob, this is a really interesting question. It turns out that if you want to look at college enrollment trends, you ought to go back and look at birth rates first. Because, 15 or 18, 20 years down the line, you're going to understand what the college trends look like. So I went back and I saw that since 1990, the birth rate in the United States has declined every single year for 29 consecutive years. And finally, in 2019 to 2023, maybe they're going to be known as the pandemic babies coming later, but we finally saw an uptick in the number of births in the U.S. So that's actually obviously a good trend for a lot of reasons, including those of us who want to be on Social Security one day and we need people to pay those freight. But the birth rates were down really considerably in particularly 1995 to about 2010. And so what does that mean for college enrollment? Sort of similar trend. It's really kind of interesting. If you look from like 1970 to about 2010, college enrollment actually doubled and went from a little under 10 million people going every year to over 20 million by about 2010. And then from 2010, boom, we started to see some of that effect of probably birth rates and lots of other things. But that trend actually started to go down. And we got under 20 million college students back around 2021, so just a few years ago. Now, the good news is, because the birth rates are going to go the other way, we'll see trends going up. But you really think about it, from like 1970 to 2010, doubling and then reducing by about 10% in the next decade, that's really pretty significant. So today there are about 18 million students on college campuses. About 15 million of them are undergrads, and about 3 million of them are graduate students. And the last part of this, like, big macro demographic thing that we're talking about, and this is the troubling sign, I think, in the whole thing, and that is that the percentage of high school grads, so those are like in the kind of 18 to 24-year-old demographic, only about 60% of them in the last couple of years have gone on to college. About 70% of them back in 2010 were going on to college. So, for lots of reasons like COVID, and I'm sure that the whole hysteria around student loan debt in the 2016 to 2018, 2019 period really started to take students in a different direction. And for colleges, that's not great news. But on the other hand, for students, if they're going out and they're getting certificates or they're getting welding, they're going into the trades or they're doing something else and they're making money, that might be okay. But for colleges, these trends aren't very good.
It makes me wonder, because what we're seeing trend-wise and event happening-wise is that the effects of interest rates and the effects of COVID and everything just seem like they're starting to manifest themselves into what we're kind of seeing pop up today as far as banks and everything that's going on. And it makes me wonder if we're going to see, like we saw, you were talking about the dramatic jump up in enrollment, if you're going to see maybe a dramatic downward spiral in enrollment.
Bob, I think the pandemic had all kinds of effects on us that we're still not through. And we understand the financial side of it, right? We see that kind of unfolding. We know what's going on. Remember last summer, it was a whole supply chain issue. Everything was going up. Inflation's going through the roof. Maybe we're starting to get some handle on that. We'll see in the coming year or so. So there's a huge effect on the financial element about going to college. Everyone knows it's expensive, and
yes,
we know that we have to find a way to deal with that. But the other side of this, and when I talk to high school counselors, this is the hidden trauma. And you have a high school senior now, so you may know this better than I do. But their wellness is a real issue. What they've gone through psychologically, and I heard stories very recently. Well, I called a business associate of mine. How's your family? Oh, I had to go visit my son. He dropped out of his freshman year at school, and he's in a rehab program, not for an addiction, but for mental wellness.
Wow. And
he just couldn't deal with it. And I know that you said, wow, that was my reaction, but I also have been wowed so many times in the last 3 months when I talk about some issues. When my niece has some issues, she's 13 years old, mental wellness kind of issues, and I share this, and Bob, I can't tell you, way too many times on the other side of that conversation is someone sharing something very similar about their school-age children. So, I mean, not to be too pessimistic around this, but I think the reality is that we're just now learning what's going to happen in I'm going to say, for better or for worse, the pandemic's pretty much over from a health perspective. We come in New York City now, and very few people are wearing masks. We were like the mask capital of the world here for a while. Everybody had them in the streets, and it's not like that anymore. And so we're kind of getting back to normal. I went to an event last night. Actually, I saw Bono doing his one-man play.
Really?
I think 3 people. Yeah, it was really good, by the way.
Just kind of drop that in there. Went and saw Bono last night.
Yeah, he did a one-act play. It was great, but there were 3 or 4 people in the whole theater wearing a mask, and it wouldn't have been like that 6 months or a year ago. So I think like the pandemic is kind of behind us, but now we're starting to pick up the pieces. And I wonder, and I'm frankly fearful when I hear all these stories from college campuses, and like our wellness centers are at or above capacity. So there's a lot going on here. Not to get down on that too much, but I think it is a factor when students are saying, "Hey, do I want to go away from home? Do I want to stay closer to home? Do I want to take some time off first?" I think there's a lot in the air right now that's driving these decisions.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what the landscape of this country, including college, including all the things we talk about, is going to look like in 3 to 5 years. It's just a really interesting time. So let's talk a little bit, get caught up on student loan forgiveness. It wouldn't be a program if you and I didn't start off getting an update with that. And you could probably, at some point, you're going to go, "Hey, I got nothing for you." Anything, it's been 2 or 3 weeks that you've been on the program. Anything new come up or interesting that has taken place?
Yeah, I've got nothing for you, Bob.
That'll do it.
No, honestly, the quick update on that, we're waiting for the Supreme Court to make its ruling, and the court's term will be over sometime in late June. So this hearing was held back on argument. The oral arguments were back on February 28th. The court said we're going to expedite this decision. Here we are on May 4th. No decision as of about 30 minutes ago when I checked. And we will expect to see it sometime in the next 5 or 6 weeks. And then after that, we'll probably have some conversations about whatever that decision is and what it means. But we're one day not going to be talking about the Supreme Court and student loan forgiveness. It's going to have an end, and it's coming sometime soon.
This isn't what I'm about to say is not a pro-student loan forgiveness. It's not the meaning behind it. Just kind of a side note, I was thinking about this today, that there's the willingness of the government, and I still don't think that people really are grasping the significance of this, that would take 3 banks that have failed in the past almost a month and would guarantee 100% of the deposits. Forget what the FDIC said. We're going to insure all the deposits here. It makes me wonder if all of a sudden student loan forgiveness looks kind of inexpensive. When you start thinking about if the government ends up backstopping 100% of the deposits, if we get a banking crisis that starts, whatever, the 350 billion or whatever that number is just doesn't seem like a big deal.
Yeah, Bob, you're right about that. With call it $6 trillion of loans, total loans eligible for some kind of action, right? And so they could write that off. I think your point about the deposits, we haven't seen the actual numbers yet, but a couple $1 trillion among some banks probably is not really all that much money in the scheme of things in that world. But here's something that you talk about, the hidden cost. We've been talking about this for 26 or 36 or 37 or 38 months now, the student loan pause, right? That was March 2020. Well, there's a cost to that, Bob, and the cost of that is between $5 and $8 billion per month. So when you look at that, I saw a really interesting article a week or so ago that said, just by the way, if we did this $10,000 forgiveness program in March of 2020, it would have been cheaper than doing the student loan pause.
That's just way too much.
and
over the top.
So we've done the pause. No one's talking about like what the pause. It's almost like it's free. You don't read it in the mainline newspapers.
Right.
Oh, the student loan pause is costing us. So everyone thinks somehow it's free, I guess. So let's just assume that they do the pause. That's going to cost maybe $400 billion or something like that. And then they come back around and say, oh, yeah, we're going to do the forgiveness for another $350. So all of a sudden, that's almost $1 trillion right there.
Right. A little bit more than what I was guessing at on that number. Well, is the cost that you're talking about on a monthly basis, I'm assuming that's interest costs.
That's right.
Yeah, that's and let's talk a little. That's a good segue into another question that I think we covered a little bit last time, but I kind of want to go back over it. This is if you really look at the numbers and you look at the interest that was not charged during this deferment period, students have kind of gotten a nice little bonus with that, in not paying that interest.
Yeah, I would
not
agree.
having that interest charged.
Yeah, they're not incurring that. They're getting actually two benefits. One is they didn't pay the interest, and the second is that, and this is like one of those, we get in the weeds sometimes on this, Bob, but one of those arcane parts of the student loan program where we start talking about we talked about the public service loan forgiveness program a while ago. And there are some criteria in there. If you make X number of on-time payments, I think it's 120, 10 years worth, you're eligible then for this loan forgiveness program. Well, we have students now who have had the clock running for 3 years that haven't been required to make a payment that are getting credit for that. So when the repayment started, by the way,
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, right. So all of a sudden now they're like 30% through there without having to make a dime's worth of payment. They're already 30% into and sometimes that's the most difficult part of the repayment period because they're starting. So the question is, okay, what's going to happen when this whole thing restarts? And I think there could be, some real issues about getting students back paying again. But the bottom line is there are always these hidden costs around. So we've got the interest cost, and then we've got this public service loan forgiveness clock running and all the rest of it. So it's going to be interesting in the next 6 or 9, 12 months when we start tallying up the actual cost of what all these programs were.
I got a feeling that that's going to be kind of swept under the rug. I think that's going to be one of those subjects we don't hear a whole lot more about, and it's just going to go with the next crisis. But, John, think about it for a minute. You've got, and this is, of course, a subset of everybody that this affects, but you've got those who are graduating, that you have those who were making payments fresh out of college who just all of a sudden had this pause start. And now you're asking students to do two things: potentially face a recession. Let's face it, the economy is not great, even though maybe some of the numbers say it. I would argue the numbers aren't exactly correct, and even if they were correct, well, I think we're kind of seeing it reverse order. But if you look at the potential banking crisis, recession, not a great backdrop for trying to get a job that you want and getting stuck with now, oh, that I forgot about that payment I've got to start making again.
That's right. And I think part of that issue, Bob, that you're bringing up, and I was saying early in the pandemic that students should continue to make their student loan payments because it was a total pay down against the principal, and economically that sounded like a great thing to do. The end, they may prove me completely wrong on that one. We'll see what happens once all the numbers come out. But the other thing is that the undergraduate unemployment rate was really low during that period, right? And now, because of what you're talking about in interest rates and the cycle that we're in and inflation and the slowdown in the economy that we're seeing, and we saw big companies like McKinsey and some of the others started saying, this is like one of these recession indicators, right? A leading indicator.
Right. They
started saying to the people they just hired, oh, by the way, we'll pay you some money. Don't come to work for us for another year. Like we want to, they didn't renege on their job offer, but they said, we really don't have use for you right now. So your offer is good. We gave them a little bit of payment on the side. You can show up in another year from now. And when you see companies like that doing it, this is going to trickle down. And I think the undergraduates, particularly those, we'll say with soft majors, are going to have trouble getting jobs. It's the cycle. You know how these cycles work.
Yeah, I just wish some of those people in Washington actually knew how those cycles work. Well, speaking of which, it seems to me that when you start to really look at and obviously this problem has gotten so much bigger than when we were talking about it a year ago. I'm talking about the people, the students who have to start paying again on these loans. I got to think that if this does not go pretty smoothly, don't you think that the politicians are going to have to get to a point where they go, yeah, maybe we should revisit some of these laws against defaults, late payments, people who can't pay, because it's just really turned into a big mess.
Yeah, and the question I think really is, does it turn into a big enough mess that they'll actually care about it?
Yeah, good point.
Your point before is like, oh yeah, they're going to have to pay attention. Well, maybe they don't have to pay attention. I mean, look, not to again, we're like in the dark shadows here today and what we're talking about, but just look at all these crazy like active shooter things where we have all this stuff happening, and the politicians say, oh, this is really bad, we're going to change all this, and nothing changes. Right, and so what makes me fearful is, all right, there are people in pain, but if it's relatively not important to them, then I think we keep kicking the can down the road until somebody, either the pain point becomes so high or somebody actually says, you know what, I really do care about this.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. John Hupalo is here, as he is every month, to talk all things college. If you want more information about John, great websites you can go to, a lot of free information the way I like that. MyCollegeCorner.com is a must see. There we go. And something that you need to go check out, MyCollegeCorner.com. Let's talk about kind of walk through the process, and we do this from time to time. I think it's important that people get this information and understand that and know what their options are. Things are starting to crank back up. I'm a student. I graduated, let's say, and now I'm going to have to start paying making this payment, which I don't think I can do it. What are my options?
Yeah, the options are several-fold. One, there's like a pecking order of things that are good, right? So each student who was just accepted at a school, and most of them in the last couple of days chose the school and actually sent in a deposit, right? And then the reality is, okay, now I've got to pay this bill, right? So how do I do this? So the first good thing for most students is there's some financial aid available for a lot of folks. And I want to just go off a little bit on this anecdote, Bob. If a student didn't receive any financial aid, I highly encourage them to contact the school and say, gee, I didn't get any financial aid. Do you think you might have some available? my daughter is going to go to a graduate school next year. She didn't get any financial aid. She was having, this happened 2 weeks ago. She was having a conversation with the admissions officer. So I said to her, just ask them if they might have some financial aid for you. And Bob, lo and behold, she is now some fellow and has some financial aid.
Wow. Just
because she asked. So I highly encourage families to go, and if they got a rejection right out of the box, go back and just ask again. All they can say is no, right? So that's like the very first thing. Look at that financial aid award letter, and on the financial aid award letter, understand what aid was provided. Because on the financial aid award letter, aid includes loans, and it'll say like federal direct loan, subsidized or unsubsidized. The good money on a financial aid award letter is the free stuff, and that will be a grant. It'll say grant right there. It'll say scholarship. Or one other piece of the aid package, which is okay, but it's not great, but it's okay, is a federal work study, and then there's an asterisk usually that says eligibility. So they don't reduce the amount of the bill that's due by the federal work study award amount, but it's basically a guaranteed job. So I can go on campus and they'll find a job for me. So again, you start with the financial aid award letter, and after all that tallies up, and we'll just make up the number and say I got a bill for $20,000 and my financial aid award package, including the loans, is for $10,000. That means I have to come up with $10,000 more. And that's the dilemma that a lot of families face.
Right.
So they look and they say, okay, I saved, well, I'm going to say in this case, I saved $8,000 for my student to go to school. Then they have the choice. They can either use that full $8,000 now, or they can use $2,000, a quarter of it, and see. They have to make that determination of how much of the savings, if they have any, that they can use. And then after that, it comes down to maybe looking for third-party scholarships. On our mycollegecorner.com site, we have a scholarship search engine. It's free, and it comes up by deadline. So the next 10, 12 days worth of deadlines are all there, and they keep going out. There are still scholarships available. So there may be some that would be particularly good for a student. And then I always say the last resort, not the first option, are private loans. So this is away from the federal loan program. The student will already know how much eligibility you have there. There are private loans from banks, credit unions, some of the credit card companies. And then there's also the federal plus loan program for parents. It's a parent loan for undergraduate students, plus, PLUS. And I really am not a fan of that program for a lot of reasons we can talk about. But in that sort of pecking order, financial aid award letter, third-party scholarships and savings, the sort of free money, and then some package of loans to fill out the balance.
You know, one of the things I want to do, and maybe we'll do this next month, is really go through just about everything you said and get into some real details of how a lot of this works. I do have a question for you, John. When you try to give your daughters advice on college, do they kind of roll their eyes and then do you have to remind them what you do for a living?
Yes, and absolutely yes. But it doesn't mean they don't listen eventually. Like my daughter, she came back to me and she said, "Hey, Dad, thanks for that. That was a really good idea." So, all right, there we go. So,
yeah. Did you just say, "I know"? I know. Okay.
Yeah,
John,
I try not to.
John, great to have you on. Listen, we'll talk to you next month. God bless.
God bless you, Bob. Thank you. Be well.
This is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.